In a remote rural village in the United States in the 1960s, continuous droughts caused rivers to dry up, farmland to crack, and the villagers' lives were tortured. During this difficult time, the village leader, the great-grandfather of the storyteller, encounters a mysterious middle-aged traveler. He calls himself Mr. Grayson, a passing traveler seeking shelter for a night. Despite the difficulty of making a living, the stranger was warmly received. That night they shared a simple supper, a thin soup and a few slices of bread, but at that time, it was a good meal. Mr. Grayson and the elder sat under dim light, around an old wooden table, chatting happily. He spoke of his in-depth understanding of geography and natural phenomena, and claimed to have special abilities in finding water sources. This made the elder curious. Although he had reservations about it, he decided to give Mr. Grayson a chance after years of drought. The next day, Mr. Grayson led the villagers to a specific location. He held a wooden stick in his hand, as if he was feeling the secrets of the earth. Under his guidance, the villagers began digging. After several hours of hard work, they were pleasantly surprised to find a source of clear water. This discovery immediately ignited the hope of the villagers, who cheered as if they saw life. However, while the villagers were expanding the wellhead, they accidentally dug up something disturbing, a withered female corpse wrapped in yellow cloth strips. This discovery suddenly changed the originally cheerful atmosphere, and the faces of the villagers were full of horror and confusion. The village priest arrived, dealt with the unfortunate discovery, and took the body back to the church in an attempt to bring peace to the poor soul. That night, in order to thank Mr. Grayson, the elder specially prepared a sumptuous dinner, and the villagers gathered together to try to get rid of the haze of the day. But just as dinner started, a sudden storm broke out outside. The thunder was deafening and the rain poured down like a waterfall, seeming to swallow up the entire world. The villagers happily talked about the heavy rain, and some people ran directly into the rain to enjoy the long-lost coolness. The dry and cracked earth seemed to be frantically sucking water at this time. The elder's granddaughter, the narrator of the story, recalled that it was the biggest thunderstorm she had ever seen in her life, and it seemed as if the whole world was shaking. Everyone was immersed in joy, and no one guessed the disaster that was about to happen. The next morning, when the villagers walked out of their houses, they discovered a shocking sight. The newly dug wells had dried up again, and the surrounding farmland had also lost its moisture, as if it had been completely sucked dry by some mysterious force. The village once again fell into despair, and when they came to the church, they found an even more horrifying scene. The priest was dead and covered in bruises, as if he had been bitten by wild beasts, and the female body was missing. From that day on, more strange events began to occur in the village. Young male villagers disappeared mysteriously one after another. Each disappearance added new fear and despair to the village. Elders and villagers tried to find help, but no one seemed to have answers. And Mr. Grayson, this mysterious traveler, claimed that his abilities were limited and left in a hurry on the night when the incident occurred, leaving only one promise: to find the person who can solve all this. As the days passed, the atmosphere in the village became heavier. Every sunset seemed to portend more misfortune. The villagers' hearts were filled with fear, and the darkness of night became their biggest enemy. Everyone stayed behind closed doors at night. During the day, the elders stood at the entrance of the town, looking into the distance, looking forward to Mr. Grayson's return and a solution. During this period, more young men disappeared mysteriously, and the village fell into unprecedented panic. One evening more than a month later, Mr. Grayson finally returned to the village with a mysterious old man who looked quite old. Their arrival was like a ray of light piercing the heavy clouds. Elders and villagers gathered around them, hoping to find solutions to their problems from these two mysterious figures. Mr. Grayson explained to the elders that an ancient and evil spirit, the Wendigo, was accidentally released while digging the well water. This old man, according to Mr. Grayson, has the knowledge and ability to fight this evil spirit. When the villagers heard this name, they felt both fear and curiosity. Wendigo, a name only mentioned in old stories, has now become their nightmare in reality. The old man's eyes were deep, as if he could see through it all. He wasted no time and went straight to his work. The old man first came to the well that had dried up. He stood silently by the well, closing his eyes, as if communicating with invisible forces. After a while, he began to recite an ancient and mysterious mantra while drawing a series of complex symbols in the air with his hands. The villagers gathered around. Although they did not understand the old man's behavior, they could feel a sacred and mysterious power flowing in the air. At night, the moon rose to the highest point in the night sky, and its silvery moonlight shone on every corner of the village. At this moment, the old man suddenly stood up, with a serious and nervous expression on his face. He told everyone that the time had come. A group of people held torches and followed the old man to a forest outside the village. The old man stood at the edge of the woods and began to call loudly into the darkness, trying to communicate with the Wendigo. His voice echoed in the silent night air, and every word was full of power. Suddenly, a thin figure jumped out of the woods. Its appearance was horrifying. Tall and thin, with deathly gray skin, sunken eye sockets, and bloodstains on the corners of its mouth. This time, by the light of the torch, everyone could really see what the Wendigo looked like. The appearance of the monster shocked everyone, but they held torches and did not retreat. The old man seemed unusually calm at this time. He faced the Wendigo and began his sealing ritual. The villagers, led by the old man, formed a circle around the terrible Wendigo. The light of the torch reflected the twisted and ferocious face of the Wendigo, and its eyes seemed to be able to penetrate people's hearts, emitting a cold light. There was a suffocating tension in the air. The old man took out a short sword, the blade of which glowed with a faint blue light. He waved the sword gently, as if drawing a pattern in the air that only he could see. He kept chanting ancient and mysterious spells in his mouth. Although his voice was weak, it was full of power and belief. Mr. Grayson took out an ancient mirror from his pocket, and then the moon reflected a dazzling light from the mirror. This light shined straight at the Wendigo. The Wendigo roared with fury, its sound so deafening that it made the surrounding trees tremble. Then, the Wendigo began to attack the old man. Its movements are fast and ferocious, and every attack carries the power to destroy everything. The old man evaded with difficulty, and at the same time kept waving his iron sword in the air, seeming to create an invisible restraint for the Wendigo. The villagers watched this thrilling confrontation with both fear and awe in their hearts. Suddenly, the old man's movements became faster and more intense, and he began to guide the Wendigo in a specific direction. Under his guidance, the Wendigo was forced into a circle surrounded by torches. Within this circle, the old man began the final sealing ceremony. He inserted the dagger into the ground, then held the hilt with both hands and began to recite a more powerful spell. As his spells became louder and louder, the blue light on the dagger began to become more dazzling, and the entire sword body was wrapped in a layer of mysterious light. At this moment, the Wendigo let out a desperate howl, as if being stabbed by an invisible force. The old man's face showed a trace of fatigue, but his eyes were full of determination. But just when everyone thought everything was about to end, the old man's expression suddenly became serious. He told everyone that this was only temporary peace, and now more powerful force was needed to completely seal the Wendigo. He turned to look at Mr. Grayson, and the two exchanged glances, as if they were discussing the next action in a tacit understanding. The old man and Mr. Grayson acted quickly and began to prepare for the final sealing ceremony. Although the villagers don't understand what will happen next, they know that this may be the only chance to end this nightmare. The old man, dagger in hand, began his spell. This time the spell sounded more ancient and complex, and every word was accompanied by a strong vibration. Mr. Grayson placed various mysterious symbols and herbs aside to assist the old man in his rituals. As the spell progressed, the magic circle set around the torch circle began to glow, and beams of light rose from the ground, forming a huge pillar of light that shot straight into the sky. The Wendigo is now trapped in the pillar of light. The villagers were deeply shocked by this spectacular sight. They watched nervously, full of expectation and uneasiness. Suddenly, the old man's voice stopped, and he slowly opened his eyes, with determination shining in his eyes. He took a deep breath, then pulled the dagger out of the ground and raised it high. At this moment, his body seemed to be surrounded by a powerful force, and his face became blurred in the light. At this moment, the Wendigo's roar sounded again, and its figure struggled within the magic circle, trying to break the shackles of the light beam. But no matter how hard it struggled, it couldn't break through the magic circle set up by the old man. The old man began to recite the final sealing spell, and his voice resounded throughout the night sky. As his voice became louder and louder, the light of the magic circle became brighter and brighter. Suddenly, he stopped chanting, and all his strength seemed to be concentrated on the dagger in his hand. Then, he made an astonishing move. He cut his palm with the tip of the sword, and blood flowed along the sword body. This drop of blood fell on the magic circle, immediately causing a strong vibration, and the entire magic circle seemed to be activated. The Wendigo's howls became more desperate, and its body began to slowly fade into the light. And the old man's body became weaker and weaker, as if he was using his own life to drive the magic circle. When the last trace of the Wendigo disappeared into the light, the old man fell with him. The powerful light gradually receded, and the night sky returned to calm. Mr. Grayson and the villagers stood there, stunned, unable to believe what had just happened. The old man used his own life to complete the seal, imprisoning the Wendigo in the pillar of light forever. His sacrifice saved the entire village from the threat of the Wendigo, but his loss also left the villagers with deep sorrow. The night gradually faded, and the village regained its tranquility. Mr. Grayson silently packed up the items around the circle, with tears shining in his eyes. The elders and villagers came forward one by one to pay tribute to this brave old man. From that day on, the terror of the Wendigo never appeared in the village again. The old man's sacrifice became part of the village legend, and his courage and wisdom will always be remembered in the hearts of every villager. And the place sealed by the old man became a taboo place, and the villagers no longer dared to approach it. As time passed, the story became a legend, passed down orally from generation to generation. And that remote American countryside also became a little unusual because of this legend.